Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hello, Professor Dershowitz.
Hi.
All right, so we are going to begin with perhaps the most scary news of the year, at least for the United States. The director of the CIA has just announced that he is concerned that North Korea could hit the United States with a missile in just a handful of months, meaning the recent panic that ensued in Hawaii following a false alarm could actually happen in the continental United States. Professor Dershowitz, how worried should we be?
Well, we should be much more worried that this will be the same announcement that's going to be made 10 years from now regarding Iran. We have limited options when it comes to North Korea. We have tremendously variable options when it comes to Iran. And we have to stop thinking only about tomorrow and think about the day after tomorrow and next week. And we just cannot allow Iran to become the next North Korea, because remember that North Korea does not have hegemonic ambitions. They don't want to take over Japan. They don't want to take over China. Whereas Iran has hegemonic ambitions and also the stated ambition to destroy the nation state of the Jewish people, which they consider a one-bomb state. So all the focus should be on Iran, not on North Korea. North Korea can be easily destroyed with one simple attack if it became necessary. I'm talking about its nuclear capacity. It would, of course, have great impact on South Korea and its neighbors, but it, in the end, does not pose a strategic threat to the United States, whereas Iran poses a major strategic threat if it is allowed to develop nuclear weapons. So whenever I hear about Korea, I think Iran.
Now, Professor Dershowitz, we're going to get to Iran more in depth after this, but what do you believe needs to be done right now regarding North Korea more specifically?
Well, the United States has to be prepared to take military action if necessary to knock out its nuclear capacity. It also has to have a strong deterrence. In his State of the Union message, the president talked about increasing the United States nuclear capacity to include, I suspect, tactical nuclear weapons. Every other option has to be considered, including changing American law with regard to assassination. If the leadership of the North Korean country can be terminated without a massive attack on the entire country, that would be an option to be preferred over some kind of a massive attack. I don't think it's enough to simply contain North Korea and to count on deterrence, though that may be the option in the end that will be pursued. These are very, very difficult strategic decisions that have to be thoughtfully considered. And the tragedy is that we allowed ourselves, the United States, to get into the situation where North Korea is now making us, presenting us with these horrible choices. We have to make sure that never does Iran present us with those horrible choices. And we're a step closer to that than we were after the deal that the United States signed with Iran several years ago.
All right, well, let's hold off on Iran for now. Joining us now in the studio is Dr. Dan Chiftan, the director of the National Security Studies Center at the University of Haifa. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm going to let you kick off your discussion with the professor.
I want to discuss a new challenge that Israel is facing, and I don't think we have any precedent. Israel is set in the middle of a region that is not only in deep crisis, not only with enormous failure, but also hopeless. And what is new in the last few years is the understanding of people in the region that it is a hopeless region, namely that it's not a crisis, not something that in a few years will be over, not something that in the next generation or more than a generation can be settled. They realize that this is something that will affect them for a very long period of time. And therefore, millions of people from the region either leave it or want to leave it and can't leave it, not for a while, a shelter for the night, but for a long period of time, because they don't believe that their children and their children's children have much hope in this region. And this has in the near future, it has minor advantages to Israel, but it has a major disadvantage. The advantages are that we are surrounded by weak countries, and at the moment they don't present an existential threat to Israel. But if you look at the broader picture, it means that for a very long time to come, this generation, probably the next generation, hoping for peace in the region is not realistic. Not only because you have very anti-Israel positions among the Palestinians and others and radical elements, but also because in the midst of this turmoil, where you have people killing each other on a scale that we have not seen in other places, where we have states that are not sustainable, leaving Israel alone, a situation where Israel can be surrounded by relatively stable countries, is not an option. And it is also not an option that the radicals in this region will treat the Israelis, if they could, better than they treat their own brothers. So the question is, and I think Israeli public opinion is beginning to adjust to it, understanding that conflict is not a transit period. It is something that will be with us for a very, very long time to come. I don't remember we've ever had a democratic society, an open society, facing this kind of hostility on such a scale for such a long time. I don't have any doubt that Israel can deal with it, but I'm saying this is something that we have to prepare ourselves for, and to a large extent, Israeli public opinion is already beginning to prepare for it.
Well, it reminds me of the old joke that in Israel, a pessimist is somebody who says, "Oi, things are so bad they can't possibly get any worse," and an optimist says, "Yes, they can." You're suggesting that things really are bad and can get worse. Well, I have a different view of the matter. I do think you're right that we're never going to see stable democracies surrounding Israel, certainly not in our lifetime. But I think that this is the appropriate time, because of Israel's relative strength and the relative weakness of other countries, for Israel to offer a generous peace to the Palestinians, to either get a rejection for a generous peace of the kind that happened in 2000, 2001, and 2008, and the response that Israel got to the withdrawal from the Gaza. It's time for Israel to do that again, with the possibility that a weak Palestinian state with an old Palestinian leader may actually want to sit down and try to come up with some kind of a two-state solution. If that were to happen, if there were to be a peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians, much like that between Israel and Egypt and Jordan, even though it's shalom, shalom, and shalom, peace, peace, but no real peace, I think Israel's relationships with the Sunni Arab states could improve tremendously. The benefit to the Sunni states in the Gulf would be tremendous, and Israel could at least add to the stability of the region and take advantage of the current instability. I think Israel's, right now, the situation with the Palestinians is not helping Israel, and I do think that some solution, not going to be perfect, but some solution with the Palestinians, some symbolic right of return of 40 or 50,000 people, a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, land swaps for the existing settlements remaining in Israel, with an equal amount of land in the Afula Triangle being given over to a Palestinian state. The time is right for that offer to be put on the table, and for the Palestinians to either accept it or reject it, or to sit down and negotiate about it. I do think that take advantage of instability to help create just a little bit more stability in the region would be a good thing.
Well, I'm delighted that I can disagree with you. I was afraid that I'll come here and we'll agree about everything. I have two comments on it. First of all, the chances of agreement between Israel and the Palestinians have been zero, are zero, and will be zero, because I don't think the Palestinians want a state. They're not willing to accept the responsibility for a state. They're not willing to give up the right of return. We have tried it in 2008. By the way, I supported it in 2008, and I knew that they would reject it. I'm advocating for more than 40 years now unilateralism. I want to get out from the overwhelming majority of the West Bank, and I want to simply disconnect ourselves completely from the Palestinian community. But my deepest comment here, my more important comment, is that I don't think that it will have any major effect on the region. The significance of the Palestinian issue in the Middle East is negligible. We've seen it recently. What is happening in the region generally has nothing whatsoever to do with the Palestinian issue. And even if we reach such an agreement, I don't think it will affect the region. And then say with the Palestinians we don't have a confrontation, but other radical forces supported by Iran, supported by others, this can destroy the ability to stabilize an Israeli-Palestinian peace for a very long time. So basically my arguments are two. A, there cannot be an agreement, and there should be not even been an attempt to do it. But if we need to separate from them, and we must, we should do it unilaterally. And second, the region will continue to be unstable and very hostile and very violent, regardless of our relations with the Palestinians.
So we really have a disagreement. If you are right empirically that the Palestinians will reject an offer, that is a perfect reason for making the offer. For making the offer and making it as generous as possible. Look, I spend my life trying to defend Israel in the court of public opinion on American universities and European universities. Give me a weapon. Give me some ammunition. Give me the ammunition of a firm offer. I can tell you that right after 2001, I was, and many people who support Israel, in a much, much better position to defend Israel, to fight BDS, with that offer on the table. So if you are right that the Palestinians will reject an offer, that's a perfect reason for making it. I think there's a possibility they may accept it. As far as unilateral disengagement, I think we learned the lesson with Gaza. I was in favor of unilateral disengagement when Prime Minister Sharon left the Gaza. That turns out to have been, I think, a very serious mistake. I do think it was right to end the settlements in the Gaza, but to end the military occupation simply allowed the Hamas and other terrorist groups to send rockets into Israel. If that happened on the West Bank, it would be much more serious because they could shut down Ben Gurion Airport and reach other much more vulnerable areas. So I would not accept unilateral disengagement, which included ending the military occupation. I would certainly accept unilateral disengagement that ended increased settlement activities and perhaps accepted a variation of the Alon plan, where what is on the ground with some strategic changes in the border. But I do think that at least offering a deal, the two in tandem might work. That is, offer a deal, a generous deal, let the world see it. And if the Palestinians reject the generous offer, then some sort of disengagement coupled with continued military presence on the West Bank might be an acceptable solution to the international community and to Israel.
So we're not so far away as I thought, for two reasons. A, I don't mind making the offer. I only know with absolute certainty it will be rejected. Second, I think that if we withdraw unilaterally from the overwhelming majority of the West Bank, we should leave the Israeli army inside, because otherwise what will happen is exactly what you portrayed. And I would just say, and this would help you in your court of public opinion, that the moment the Jordanians are willing to send their army into the West Bank, I'm willing to take the Israeli army out in 2 weeks. So this kind of package, I would, but let's go back to something more fundamental, namely that even if this succeeds, and I'll be delighted, and I'm advocating for it, and I've written a book about it, and I think that the Gaza disengagement was a tremendous success. Because what I wanted from the Gaza disengagement was, I only asked myself one question: is the Israeli society stronger with Gaza or without Gaza? And since the Israeli society is stronger without Gaza, I wanted to get out of the Gaza Strip. But at the time, I wanted the Israeli army to go out of the Gaza Strip, because my real battlefield is inside Israel with Israeli public opinion. I wanted to convince Israelis that regardless if we withdraw from Gaza to the 5th of June boundaries, these people would want to kill Jews more than to give their children a better life. And having persuaded the Israeli public opinion that this is the essence of the conflict and not the settlements is tremendously important for a strong Israeli society. So On the bottom line, we both agree two things. A, that we need to make an offer that can look good, even if we know that it will be rejected, and I'm sure it will be rejected. And second, that when it doesn't work, not if, but when it doesn't work, we should take unilateral steps and leave the Israeli army in the West Bank.
I think I disagree with one point, and that is I am more hopeful that if the West Bank could look like Ramallah rather than like Gaza, if it can be wealthy, supported by a European Marshall Plan, where the children of the West Bank have a real hope, where a high-tech society can be built with the assistance of Israel, I think the Palestinian people will want their own state more than they'll want not there to be a Jewish state, and want their own children to be safe rather than kill Israeli children. Look, it's a hope. I am an optimist in the more traditional sense of that word. I saw what happened when the East Germans wanted to be like West Germans and they knocked down the wall. I saw what happened after the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nonetheless, the Japanese were prepared to create a real alliance with the United States because it was in their political and economic interest to do so. So I'm not prepared to write off the possibility that Palestinian people, Palestinian leaders will prefer their own security over the need to destroy the nation state of the Jewish people. Perhaps I'm a dreamer, but I do think that if you dream it, it can happen. And I'm prepared to at least recommend that Israel try to go down that path. We're not so far away operationally. We are very far away in terms of what we expect might happen from those operational decisions.
Well, I'm delighted that you're more cheerful than I am, but let me make one comment here. The question is cultural. The reason that the Germans have succeeded and the Japanese have succeeded and Arab states have failed, regardless of the Arab-Israeli conflict, has to do with the political culture that prevails in Europe or in Japan on the one hand and in the Arab world on the other. And what I see here is that the Arabs have gotten, the Palestinians have gotten more assistance from the world than any other people in human history, and they wasted all of it on corruption and war. But one last thing, because I don't want to leave this program not saying that I'm an optimist too, but I'm an optimist of a different kind. I think a dumb optimist believes that things will be better. A smart optimist says things will get worse, but we will get stronger faster than things get worse. And in the final analysis, I think this is what Israel has done. Things have gotten worse in the region in many fields, particularly since we had radical Islam in the region. But Israel got stronger faster than things got worse. And therefore, at the moment, we are strong enough to maintain our existence. I hope very much that I'm wrong and that you are right. But I've hoped so often that other people were right and I was wrong, that now I'm afraid that again this will not happen. But if it does, I will remember your hopeful proposition and I will quote it to everybody and I will admit to having been wrong.
All right, guys, I'd like to move to our next topic before we run out of time. The Israeli Interior Minister Ali Adeli has just said that despite statements from the president of Rwanda, Israel has reached an agreement with a third-party country in Africa to deport and accept asylum seekers even against their will and with force. What could stop this? And I understand that there's some people in the room here who don't necessarily want to stop this, right? Would you like to begin?
Well, it pains me to agree with Derry on anything because I have a very major problem with the personality. But I think that the question is not if Rwanda is willing or not willing. In the final analysis, we are not responsible for anybody who infiltrated into Israel. And we've seen in Europe the catastrophic consequences of wanting to feel good about ourselves and paying in terms of irresponsibility for next generations. I want people who came from Africa to Israel to write to their relatives and their friends in Africa, don't come here, because otherwise Israel will be swamped. And I think it's a very good idea that we made it very difficult for people who are mostly not asylum seeker. They're mostly people who want to improve their lot in life, and they basically want to come and work in Israel. And I can understand their need, but I'm not willing to do it. I mean, look what happened to Europe just after 2015. The inevitable consequence of accepting more than 1 million people into Germany was that in Europe today, right-wing parties are rising, even fascist elements are coming closer to government, and Europe is changing in a very negative way. We must do it very, very carefully, and the question if we can secure the lives of people who will get out of Israel, I think is beyond what our responsibility demands.
Professor Dershowitz?
Well, my friend Erwin Cutler has been in Israel for the past couple of weeks seeking a resolution of this terrible, terrible problem. He has proposed the appointment of Natan Sharansky kind of to try to work out a humanitarian resolution. Look, everybody agrees that under international law, under traditional practices, Israel doesn't have to accept people who are here illegally. But we're talking about many of them are children. Some of them are working very hard. They've learned to speak Hebrew. I don't think there should be a mass deportation or a mass solution. I think Israel should try as best as possible to come up with individualized solutions that fit the needs of both Israel and individuals within the group. Some should be allowed to stay who have jobs, who've proven their ability to contribute to Israeli society. Those who have young children perhaps should be given special deference. Those who have to go back to countries where there are great political crises and upheavals going on. And Israel should look to the future. I'm not in favor of Trump's building a wall between us and Mexico, nor am I in favor of brutal ways of stopping people from coming over the way some countries have done, sinking boats. Look, what happened with Israel when boats were sunk by the British and by others when people were trying to get to Israel. I just think that Israel's moral standing in the world has to be taken into consideration. And appointing Natan Sharansky kind of as an overseer, he's a man of great integrity and human rights history, to resolve this issue in a humanitarian way, which maintains Israel's moral standing in the world, shows a little bit of Rahmanut, Rahmanis, as my grandmother would say, and solves the problem without only focusing on the immediate issue of applying the rule of law. I think when the Torah says tzedek, tzedek tirdof, it understands there are two kinds of justice: the rigid justice of the law and the justice that includes a sense of compassion, a sense of Jewish history, and a sense of trying to resolve this in a way that restores or maintains or even increases Israel's moral standing in the world. I agree that we should not allow Israel to become Europe with massive, massive immigration, but we're talking now about several tens of thousands of people, and that's a different number and requires making sure that the numbers don't increase in the future. But I think taking care of the current issue requires a balance of compassion and justice.
I agree very strongly that the combination of Natan Sharansky and Erwin Cutler is an excellent combination of people who can work out a reasonable approach. And also the Israelis have said, the Israeli government has said officially that people who came here as very young children or people with children will not be deported, at least not at this stage. So I think that a combination of showing some rahmanis to a very limited number and making very, very clear that it will not apply in the future, and getting out of Israel the people who just came here to work and are single and very young and can work in other places and so on, such a combination can work, provided we realize that this will not be a precedent for anything in the future, and being very, very strict from this point on.
All right, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank you for your time, Professor Dershowitz, and our wonderful guest, Dr. Dan Shifter. If you would like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.